Would you ever want to travel cross-country in a sleeping car?
Oh, like a sleeping car on a train?
On a train, yeah.
I mean, yes, absolutely.
Like fancy. How far
I
would
wouldn't
you want to
sleep
travel?
a wink, but I love the idea of it.
Would you go back? Would you dress up like it was like the 1920s?
Oh, I didn't realize that was the required part of it.
I'm just thinking, is this also someone's going to get murdered? It's going to be the Orient Express.
No, I don't think I'd do it like the 1920s. I think I'd do it like the 1840s. I think I'd go full like the age of rail. You know what I mean?
So you're like, it's not a sleeper car, it's like a coal car.
Yes, it's steam powered. I assume in my head it is.
Welcome to Butter No Parsnips. Every week on Butter No Parsnips, your hosts Kyle Imperator and Emily Moyers take you on an adventure through the weird, wacky, wonderful, and sometimes even wicked world of one wayside word. Strange characters, delightful bits, and general joyousness abound. Join them as they test each other's etymological expertise.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Butter No Parsnips. I'm Emily Moyers.
And I'm Kyle Imperator. And today, Emily, I may just take you on that trip that I promised you.
Wow. Okay.
But the trip that I promised you a couple weeks ago, and it was like a trip to the grocery store.
Oh, okay. You did promise me a trip a couple weeks ago. That part is real.
Oh, I did do that, yeah.
Are we going by later. Train across country?
Yeah. Actually, by the time this episode comes out, that might have happened already. But today, Emily, our trip is via word.
Of course it is. Kyle, give me that word.
Emily, your word today is flophouse. Flophouse. Flophouse.
I have 1000% heard this word.
1000%.
Yeah. But in what context? So, like, the immediate vibe that I'm getting is that this is like a very new genre of music.
It doesn't sound music, like but it's flophouse music.
But it sounds like it could be a genre of like hip hop or electronica.
Yeah, because they always take like a style and like add a ridiculous word to it anyway to make it a new style. Yeah, But regardless, that's also not what I'm sure this word means. No, not at all. Absolutely not.
Okay. Is this an adjective, Kyle?
It is not.
No, I guess not. I'm just thinking that because I'm still thinking music genre.
Well, no, that's fair. It's a noun. It can be used in an attributive sense. So it can be used like
a compound noun?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it can also be used as a verb. We're barely going to talk about that. So don't worry about that.
And this, I assume this formed in English. Does it have like a prior language of origin?
I mean, aside from the compound words having, the word
sure, like
having,
flop and house, right?
Yes, but no, it does not have an earlier origin.
So this is like slang?
It is slang, Emily, yes.
Is it a step too far to ask maybe whose slang? Because I feel like that might help me get there.
I think it might be a step too far.
Yeah, all right. Well, maybe if I dance around it enough, you'll give in and tell me.
Yeah. I'll tell you the era that it comes from.
Sure.
It originates from the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Oh.
So between 1890 and 1920-ish.
Okay. But is it like a Roaring 20s word or not? It's like before.
It saw much use during the Roaring 20s, but it came about a little earlier, a few decades before.
See, now I'm thinking, because it ends in house, I feel like it's some sort of establishment. Okay. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
And flophouse, it's sort of like flop feels like it's giving a vibe.
Sure.
And if I'm wrong, I'm going to sound vile.
Go for it.
But I feel like flophouse could mean a brothel.
Emily is a great guess. I did find definitions of this word that describe it as a brothel.
Okay.
I could not find any evidence of it, though. So we're not talking about that today.
It just sounds that way.
That may be the case. I would have to do more research, so we're not going to talk about that today. So you get a half a point for that.
Okay.
But it's not the direction that I want to go in.
Could I maybe ask for some sort of hint? Because I feel like I'm floundering.
Your one-word hint is hostile. Not like hostile, like hostile.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, now my immediate thought is it sounds like it just could be a hostel, like a place that you flop down and sleep when you don't have anywhere else. But yeah, would you make the one-word clue a synonym? Is it a hostel?
Mean, it's kind of, yeah, sure.
Or, all right, I'll give a more specific guess, and that way you can tell me definitively if I'm right or wrong. Yeah. Is it like just an abandoned place where people can come and go, like basically an unsanctioned hostel?
No.
Okay.
But I like the direction you're heading. You've got a lot of half points in here, Emily. I think it adds up to a whole point somewhere along the way.
Sure, all the fractions.
But the definition that we're looking for today is a flophouse is a cheap, rundown hotel or boarding house where many people sleep in large rooms, especially ones used by drifters or the homeless.
So is this like a free or very cheap, you said?
Free, very cheap, yes.
Sure.
Sometimes free. Well, there's a cost, but not necessarily money.
Sure. I like this.
Yeah.
Flophouse is a good word for this. I like the idea of it's where you flop.
It's where you flop. Yeah. We're going to talk about a lot of slang today, Emily.
Love it.
But to start with the origin of flophouse, it's a compound word. The suffix there is the most obvious part, right? House, as in a structure built or serving as an abode of human beings. Mm-hmm. You got that sense that it was an establishment. Like, yes, you are correct in that these are establishments that are set up by someone.
Yeah, I feel like oftentimes in slang, house will extend out to mean any sort of building or place.
Right, exactly. House comes from, it's just pretty obvious. It comes from Middle English hus, Old English hus, and Proto-Germanic husa. And they all just meant house.
Yeah, that's a pretty ancient concept of just this is where I sleep.
It's also a pretty ancient medical drama.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Hus, MD.
Dr. Hus, yeah. Flop, on the other hand, Emily, we think that it is a duller, heavier variant of the onomatopoeia flap, which originated in Middle English. It's only as old as Middle English, which is crazy to me.
Wow. So that puts it as a post 1000.
They hadn't heard birds fly before then.
They had no word for it. They said that sound that the wings make. How could we describe it?
And thanks to the men and women that we will soon talk about, Emily, flop then came to be slang for to stay, sleep, or live in a place. So flop and flophouse come from a loose group of Americans from the late 19th and early 20th centuries called hobos, and from their lexicon, which is sometimes referred to as hobo slang. Emily, what do you know about hobos?
So I felt like this was just a derogatory term that was used. I didn't know that it had a history of being a group.
Yeah, me either, until I did this episode.
I love this.
Yeah. Do you have a concept in your mind when you think of hobos? Because to me, I think of I was talking with Seth earlier. I think about the hobo clown, I think of what stereotypes do you think of when you think of a hobo?
Oh, sure. Like the clown that, the icon of clown that is sort of in the guise of.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that's about what I picture too. Raggedy old, big baggy coat and big, Also, are we going to talk about the etymology of hobo? Because I'm now very curious about that. I assume the ho comes from homeless, but the bo, I don't know where.
Emily, a good guess. We just don't know where hobo comes from.
Wow.
Part of the reason is because it is slang. So, it was in use for a while before it was even written down.
Yeah.
The earliest written instance that we have of it is from an 1885 newspaper. So that's how far back it goes, at least. But the way that it's described, it clearly had been in use by the time that article had been written.
Sure.
There is a long list of dubious folk etymologies for the word. many of which I just don't have the time to bring up here today.
Sure.
But a few of them include from hoboy, H-O-E, meaning farmhand.
Oh.
Possibly a contraction of 18th century slang hawbuck, meaning country bumpkin.
Really good.
A syllabic abbreviation of the phrase homeward bound.
Oh.
Or, like you were suggesting, the terms homeless boy or homeless bohemian. Or of the Latin homo bonus, meaning good man.
Oh, I like that too.
Or possibly just a transliteration of the French hobo, meaning the highest of the handsome.
Oh,
hobo.
That is a fun one. That definitely feels like a folk etymology.
The most wrong. Yeah. Another suggestion is that it comes from a railroad greeting, like a railroad worker's greeting.
Oh.
Ho boy or hobo. Bo is in like,
like your bow.
Yeah. That 1885 edition of St. Paul, Minnesota's Daily Globe, which I brought up earlier, reads, "Hobo is a call to attract attention, the same as hello in the average citizen's vernacular. It is sometimes uttered with the aspirate omitted as obo, and is the shibboleth of that fraternity of bums and crooks. It is now commonly applied by them as a generic term to designate the order."
Wow.
So, by 1885, people were like, yeah, we already know that they call themselves this.
And that makes sense to me because I feel like there is a big link between like the homeless population and like train yards and like riding around on trains and finding sanctuary there. And
Emily, we're going to talk so much about trains and that.
Good.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's a reason why there's a connection there. But first, let's talk more about the etymology of this word and some similar words.
Yeah.
So it's important to state that within the world or community of hobos, called, get ready for this, hobohemia.
Really good. Excellent.
How great is that word? That's literally the word they use.
I'm sorry. I keep thinking about the place Hoboken. Is that at all related or not at all?
No, but it is one of the suggested etymologies for the word that it comes from the town Hoboken.
Because now I'm realizing like the kin suffix means like it's like a diminutive. So now the place just sounds like Little Hobo.
Yeah, it's not. We don't know, actually, but we don't think it is.
So that's fair.
So within their hobohemia, right, there was a delicate vernacular distinction between the hobo, the tramp, and the bum. So a hobo was one who traveled looking for work. Jesse Walter Dees writes in his undercover study, Flophouse, "The main thing to remember is that the hobo did work, would work, and often worked hard. There was no need for any stigma of pauperism to be placed on the typical hobo." So they were people who traveled to find work,
Sure.
The tramp, which comes from the verb sense of the word tramp, meaning to walk with heavy footsteps. Actually, that verb sense was in use during the Civil War to mean like a hike to places, like long hikes. Perhaps in use in the army. So we think that that's where the direct relation may have come from, although the word tramp as a noun was used to refer to homeless in England like a few decades prior.
Sure. I feel like I think of it as a British word.
But that's also where we get the word trample from.
Oh,
right?
Love it.
Yeah, from the
That
sense
makes
of to
sense.
walk with heavy footsteps.
Yeah.
But Dees describes the tramp as a degraded hobo who is dirty, slovenly, and will work, but on rare occasions. So it's kind of like, less of a person who is like traveling to work and a person who's like, oh, I'll work if I have to,
Okay. I could see where this is sliding and where we're going to get with bum.
Where we're getting to. So finally, bum is a back formation from bummer, which wasn't not like the sense of, bummer, but the word bummer meaning an idle, worthless fellow.
Sure.
From the German bummeln, meaning loaf, loiter, or stroll, which is fun. Bummeln.
Very fun that it means loaf.
Yeah. And to hobos, the bum is the lowest scale of the social order, a degenerate, non-migratory, former tramp who is usually old, decrepit, bearded, dirty, stinking, alcoholic, and lazy as the devil.
Wow. Yikes.
Yeah. Yeah. Painting a really rosy picture of
Was
life.
That written by like a bum's ex-wife?
Yeah. Well, so the thing is, which is so much fun, is that many of the people that we're going to be talking about today who were doing studies on hobos basically became hobos to find out everything about their community. So this man hoboed for years in order to learn, like, that's why it's an undercover story. He hoboed for years to figure out what their situation was and like to talk about them from a sociological point of view, and a couple other people. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Wow. Dedicated research. Love
Dedicated
that.
research, yeah. Now, these distinctions have mostly been lost on the general public, as of today, at least, right?
Yeah.
And all are now, as you said, at least a little derogatory in nature.
Yeah. And sort of synonymous.
And sort of synonymous, yeah. If you were wondering, Emily, tramp does also have the added slur of referring to a promiscuous woman.
Which is, I imagine, where the stamp comes from.
A tramp stamp. I imagine that as well, yes. And this sense of the word probably evolved from the reputation associated with female tramps.
Sure, that is how they make money.
Yes, yeah. Anyways, the members of this fraternity can be traced back to the end of the Civil War in 1865, when many veterans and newly emancipated slaves couldn't return home or didn't want to return home. But for most, it was they couldn't return home. They just didn't have a home to return to. This was exacerbated by vagrancy laws in the South as a part of the Black Codes, which were instituted to oppress freedmen and women, and also a financial crisis dubbed the Great Panic of 1873 and its ensuing Great Depression. No, not the 1930s one. The 1930s one happened, and they were like, oh, wait, no, this is a greater depression. This is the real one.
We thought the other one was bad. As it turns out, that was just like the depression.
Yeah. Now, Emily, do you remember from middle school social studies, perhaps?
Probably not.
Which industrial marvel began construction in 1863 and was completed in 1869?
Oh, can you give me a hint of where it is?
Yeah, everywhere. And perhaps regarding the question that we asked at the beginning.
The rail.
Yes, Emily. The first transcontinental railroad in America.
Wow.
So this started building just before the end of the American Civil War and was finished just a few years after, right?
Yeah. I love Ticket to Ride.
Oh, you love Ticket to Ride. God, I love Ticket to Ride. So instead of going home, Emily, many of these displaced Americans partook in a dangerous act called freight hopping or train hopping, illegally hitching rides on freight cars for travel, looking for work.
I believe also called catching out, train hopping.
Yeah, Emily, it very possibly is related to hobo slang. There's a 2003 documentary about hobos, also called Catching Out. So
it's a good phrase.
It's a good phrase. So when these trains stopped, Emily, the men who were train hoppers, who were freight hoppers, would set up encampments near the railroad that were called hobo jungles.
Ooh, great.
That's great, right?
Great term.
Spy and railroad strikebreaker Alan Pinkerton writes in his 1878 Strikers, Communists, Tramps, and Detectives, in a deep gorge near the railroad, a collection of some 20 or 30 of these outcasts are sleeping or dozing about a fire which has been kindled for warmth and to cook what little the wanderers may have stolen or begged for their supper.
Wow.
Just a little slice of life in the day of a train hopper. It was very dangerous. I couldn't get into it, but like they could get locked in freezer cars. Sometimes they caught a ride on the top of the train and got flung off if it took a turn.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'd get their legs cut off by doors closing. It was just not fun, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking, as you were reading this quote, I was like, this sounds beautiful. This also sounds like something that could easily be romanticized by people looking at it.
But honestly, truly, it was romanticized by hobos. You know, they kind of built this like American tale about, you know, their story as a community. So
it's sort of like a frontiersman on a different frontier.
Yeah, that's actually kind of exactly it. Yeah. So winter weather and then later the Great Depression of the 1930s, that big one, drastically expanded hobo populations in urban areas, and the hobo jungles followed to the outskirts of the cities.
So like slums kind of, or like more makeshift.
They were probably more makeshift. The slums were inside the cities. So these slums inside the cities, hobos called their neighborhoods skid rows. You've heard that term before, right?
In Little Shop of Horrors.
In Little Shop. I've been singing it all day. Do you know where the term comes from?
I don't at all.
Skid row is an alteration of the term skid road, which was a road along which logs are dragged or skidded. And then it came to mean downtown streets where loggers go for recreation on their time off. And it was first applied to a slum area in a loggers' part of Seattle in 1852, with the added implication of it being a man instead of a log that was skidding downhill, right?
Because he's so, like coming home drunk.
Their careers had like skid downhill. Yeah.
Oh, sure.
And nowadays, skid row, as you know, can refer more generally to any rundown area of a town where vagrants and outcasts might live, or it may be used more figuratively to mean having no money, job, or home, as in the idiom on Skid Row. Down on Skid Row.
Oh, it's the best song in that musical.
Honestly, they're all the best songs.
I'm going to say definitively, I think Skid Row is the best one.
Okay. Together, Emily, the hobo jungles and the skid rows constituted a different definition of hobohemia relating to like the area of which hobos lived. So that whole area was called a city's hobohemia.
Sure. So like prior hobohemia might refer to just like the culture as it exists disparately, yes. But this was like a spot.
A spot. Yeah. So basically every major city had a hobohemia. New York City, the Bowery district in New York City was hobohemia. If you remember back to an episode not too long ago, Soubrette, we talked about
Soubrette Row,
which was near the Bowery district, and there were Bowery Row.
So where is this a separate thing? Or the hobohemia, is this separate from like Hoovervilles in the Great Depression?
So I think Hoovervilles were like shanty towns that were more permanent establishments as like housing for people who just lost everything during the Great Depression.
Sure.
Hobo jungles were largely male-dominated and individualistic, while Hoovervilles included families and diverse urban dwellers.
Sure, so that was like a whole like displaced family, whereas this was more singular people. Yes. Got it. That makes sense.
Anyway, Emily, on these skid rows might stand any number of flophouses. Oh, remember? That's the word we're talking about today. Yeah. Flophouses were also sometimes called lodging houses or working men's hotels, at least by the establishments who set them up. But they could also be called, less favorably, flea boxes, hobo hotels, and cage hotels.
Oh, I don't like cage hotel.
The appearance of these hotels varied based on who the landlord was, but they generally included small cubicle-like rooms, hence the cage, shared bathrooms, and very minimal bedding. Sometimes it was just mats on a floor. Sometimes it would be hammocks hung from rows of wooden bars. It was probably very unpleasant.
Yeah. It sounds like the hold on a ship.
Yeah, basically. But you can't move when you're in this. You're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
An early use of Flophouse from McClure's magazine in 1904 gives a dubious etymology for the word, saying, in one of Cincinnati's slum districts stands the Silver Moon, a flophouse, i.e. a house where the occupants are flopped out of their hanging bunks by letting down the ropes.
So it's just morning time, drop everyone that's sleeping.
Yeah.
Wow. This is rough.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, that might be true. I'm not sure that that's where Flophouse comes from, but
sure.
fine.
Let's add it to the list of folk etymologies in this episode.
Yeah.
Humans like to bring order out of chaos. So if there's a word that we don't know, we'll just, hey, this sounds like it's right. So probably is.
But honestly, I think that could be a good alarm for me, at least, I think I'd wake up
if
better
someone
if that's how.
made your bed drop to the floor.
Yeah. But just a hole opened up in it and I fell through,
Just made the mattress disappear.
Yeah.
Well, what you need to get is like a Wallace and Gromit type setup where it like flings you up and then you drop down the chute and machines put clothes on you and then you just drop at the table with breakfast in front of you.
He got that idea from Cincinnati's Silver Moon.
Yeah. He said, I can improve on this.
So that man that we talked about earlier, Dees, he stayed at a flophouse in 1938. It was called the Palisades Hotel. It was a privately run operation in partnership with the Chicago Relief Association. And the hotel was responsible for taking care of the overflow from shelters in Chicago. And while he stayed there, he found most of the clients to be bums who had piled their stake, which is slang for saved some money, and were flopping for the winter, nearly all of whom were gambling penny ante style and seemed tougher than the men in the shelter.
Penny ante style. Does that just mean like very low stakes gambling?
I think it's literally like the ante was a penny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like they would just put pennies out.
And meaning they had saved up enough to like pay for the flophouse for the winter because they weren't free.
Yes. Sometimes they were, but this one was a private one. So they had to pay for it. There's a slang term that I didn't write in the thing called a ducat, which was like their meal ticket that I guess they would get from other organizations. They would get that punched to get their meal. Mm-hmm. Perhaps from the, when they paid for their stay, they would get that ticket.
Right.
Sometimes it also represented their stay there. So I guess they okay, I've got this ducat to use for, the month. Like I need to check in with it.
I like that. There's a lot of richness in that quote, Kyle.
There's more quotes. The book is all about flophouses. It's great.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating.
This was published in 1948, so it's a little past like the high mark of flophouses and hoboing, but it was during the 1930s that he had done much of this. And he discovered in this flophouse that the food was insufficient for a man who supposedly walks many miles a day in search of work. Yeah. And the cubicles were square wooden boxes with chicken mesh on top. And he found them to be dark both day and night. There was no light let in.
These were cages. Yikes.
It's kind of awful.
Yeah.
On top of this, Emily, everything in the hotel was made of wood. He's got a whole paragraph about how much of a fire hazard it was.
Terrifying.
Yes, and they sat on benches with no backs, made of wood. The beds were made of wood. The cages were made of wood. The counters were made of wood.
And this wasn't like a building, right? It wasn't like brick outside.
I don't know. I mean, that's possible. I probably depended on the place.
Because I guess I was picturing it being like in a city block, so like the exterior is...
Yeah, it probably is. But the inside's going to burn down.
Right. But if it were out in like the hobo jungle, then it would just be thrown up.
Sure, yeah. He also found that the building was filled with crumbs, which is hobo slang for lice.
Oh.
The men
Worse than I thought.
The men who stayed there told him they, as in the staff, wash when they feel like it. Sometimes each week, sometimes a month.
Wash themselves or clean the building?
The building.
Right.
But, Emily, the men had grown accustomed to the conditions. Dees referred to this institutional disease as flophouseitis, relaying a quote from a shelter doorman saying, "The caseworkers claim that young fellows, after they stay in flophouses for a month, they don't want to leave. They get flophouseitis. It's only human nature to want to lay around when you gets plenty of sleep and eats." I love this doorman.
Yeah, but also, that's just a direct line between him and the people who are like, they're abusing the food stamps. We can't give them out anymore.
Yes, absolutely.
So, not great.
No, absolutely not. So some flophouses were run by religious organizations, such as the Salvation Army. They ran a bunch of them. They didn't call them flophouses, but they ran a bunch of institutions like this. a hobo slang for the Salvation Army was to call it Sally, the Sally.
That's cute. I like that.
And bums who were willing to be saved religiously for a cup of coffee were called mission stiffs.
Oh, mission stiffs.
Stiff as in like originally slang for a corpse, obviously, but then became slang to mean just a body, just a guy.
Oh, right? Okay.
And then the mission as in like, the Salvation Army and those
mission.
related organizations. Yeah, you got it.
That's fun.
Dees draws a line between English almshouses of the Middle Ages, see episode 60, Eleemosynary, and American flophouses, and argues that the English policy holdover of either trying to cure or save individuals or deter or repress them was ineffective when they really should have just been helping to fix their circumstances.
Yeah.
Still a problem today.
Absolutely. I'm sure it is. Yeah.
Hasn't gotten much better.
Yeah.
A flophouse, Emily, can also be used as a verb, as shown in this quote from Alan Kapelner's 1960 novel, All the Naked Heroes, which says, I kept going nowhere, bummed the country, boxcarred it, breadlined it, flophoused it, that cruddy dying by inches in jungles, when, Christo, out of the knocked out black and blue, I'm told I gotta go to war, gotta fight for freedom.
Really good. Who is that?
Yeah. His name is Alan Kapelner, and I could find very little information about him.
But that's good writing. Yeah. I like the sonic quality of that writing.
It's so good. Yeah. Right? Gentrification in urban areas has since eradicated most flophouses. Most. There are still some that are around, and there's also a little bit of a movement to try and get them back to help the housing crisis, though I don't know how much that has caught on. Mm-hmm. But people are still out there hoboing, Emily. Yeah. It is still a community. It's still a culture. In fact, the National Hobo Convention in Britt, Iowa, has named a hobo king and queen annually since the year 1900.
Crazy.
They still do it. There's a date for next year's hobo convention.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we should go.
I don't know if that's for us, but...
What? You want to hop a train?
But this whole culture is fascinating, and I would love to read
really
more on it.
There's so much about it. And there's so much that extends into modern day language that I can't talk about, that I haven't been able to talk about today. So maybe we'll be able to talk about hobo slang in more future episodes. That would be fun. Yeah. But Emily, these hobos are just continuing a simple yet grand tradition enshrined by its lexicon. As sociologist Nels Anderson wrote in his 1931 book, The Milk and Honey Route, a handbook for hobos, they think by the use of slang to add a bona fide touch to the fiction that they weave.
Wow.
And now, Emily, it's time for you to add to this great American tale by using flophouse in a sentence.
Yeah. Yup. Okay.
It's just worth saying. I found some dictionary entries online that offer the definition as being used in a broader sense to refer to places that were like flophouses or hotels that were just like generally seedy. Mm-hmm. I couldn't find direct quote evidence of that, so I didn't cover it in the episode, but I think that's a natural evolution of the definition of the word if you want to use it that way.
Sure. No, I'll find a way to use it in the way that it was defined at the top. The man could no longer afford to stay in a hotel because he hadn't found work in months. So instead, he lived in a flophouse. That's a bad sentence, but I couldn't come up with anything better.
But it's an accurate use of the word, so we will take it.
Thanks. They can't all be winners, folks.
Emily, I'd like you to look up the genre that is hobo fiction and read some more uses of the word.
That will help me. That will help me. Kyle, can you take my mind off this disappointing sentence?
Absolutely, Emily. I've got just the game to help.
Game.
Emily, your game today is called Big Talk Handy Mountain.
Love that song.
Emily, I gotta be honest, this is just a hodgepodge of hobo slang trivia. but maybe it'll be useful for you. And that's why it's talk handy, you know?
Talk handy. Yeah.
Uh-huh. All right, I got 3 questions for you, okay? They're multiple choice.
Love it.
Which of these is not hobo slang? Cow flop, nickel flop, flop worker, or all of the above?
Meaning all of the above are not.
All of the above are not.
I will say that cow flop is not. Because I can speculate on possibles for nickel flop and flop worker, but cow flop, nothing springs to mind.
Yeah, you're right. You got it.
Yeah. Cool.
Cow flop is slang, and it is from around the 1920s, but I could not find an etymology of it.
Okay.
Other than to the definition, which is a synonym for a cow patty.
Oh, a cow flop. Sure.
Is a cow flop. Nickel flop is hobo slang. It refers to an all-night movie house in the sense that you pay a nickel and you get to sleep there the whole night because you're watching movies. But, yeah. A flop worker, Emily, is hobo slang for one who robs sleepers in railroad waiting rooms, public parks, or on the trains.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Work in the sense of like...
they're working the flop.
Yeah,
They're
working the flops.
Wow. I mean, I like that slang, and I like that as like a story element. I don't like that it was happening in real life.
I mean, there were so many worse things that I didn't cover here. So
yeah, I can imagine.
Okay, Emily, next question. Which of these may be etymologically related? Maybe is the operative word here. Etymologically related to hobo jungle. Okay. Is it asphalt jungle, jungle gym, or jungle juice, or all of the above?
Wow. I mean, the one that feels like it's the closest in meaning is asphalt jungle. I could also see a logic where jungle gym relates, just like if a hobo jungle was kind of like outdoorsy and campy.
Sure. Yeah.
Jungle. Oh, I guess I could also see how jungle juice could be related. I'll say all of the above.
I like your thought process there, Emily. You're wrong, but I like your thought process. It's a good guess.
I could create points of connection for all of those.
yeah.
Whether or not they're true.
Sure, absolutely. Asphalt Jungle actually comes from the title of W.R. Burnett's 1949 novel. He called it The Asphalt Jungle.
And that is, does it refer to a specific city or just like a city?
It just refers to a city.
Okay.
Jungle Gym, Emily, was the trademarked name for the contraption. Like the guy built it and just called it the Jungle Gym.
That's it. Okay.
But jungle juice, that's
the one that's related.
A mixture of alcohol and punch, may be a reference to bootleg alcohol made and drank in hobo jungles. I've seen a few sources that cite this. But it also may come from a similar area called the Jungle that was on the outskirts of Fort Collins, Colorado, which was also home to bootlegging. But I couldn't figure out if it was a hobohemia, if it was a hobo jungle as well. I did find out that there was child laborers farming beets who lived there, so that's sad.
Yeah.
I hope they weren't using the beets to make jungle juice.
I love beet punch.
Okay, Emily, your last question. Which of these is a synonym for flop? Is it kip, doss, pound your ear, or all of the above?
Okay, so I know that kip, well, I guess I shouldn't say I know. I'm pretty sure kip does mean like sleep or lie down or both. Doss, never heard in my life. Can't really make any conjecture on what is to me just a nonsense word. Pound
Basically,
your ear. Pound your ear could be like against the pillow. So I could see that. I guess I will go out on a limb and say all of the above.
It's a good limb to go out on, Emily. You're right.
Nice.
Yeah, pound your ear is American in origin. I couldn't figure out exactly what the etymology was, but it may either be related to the fact that you're pounding your ear down on a pillow to sleep, or you may hear the pounding of your blood in your ear when you're leaning on it. But kip and doss actually come from across the pond. They're British in origin, even though they were also used by American hobos. Kip is probably related to the Danish kippe, meaning dive or cheap inn. And kip can also mean a place to sleep, a nap, an untidy house or room, or along with the term kip shop, a brothel.
Love that.
And similarly, doss can mean to sleep, a place to sleep, sleep in general, or to fool about, avoid work, or pass time idly. And more recently, doss means an activity that requires little effort. And it was originally written as the verb to dorse, D-O-R-S-E, perhaps from the Latin dorsum, meaning the back, which is what one lies on when sleeping.
Short being where we get things like dorsal fin and endorse.
Yes, Emily, endorse is also related to dorsum.
Wow.
The back.
Yeah. All great.
And kip houses and doss houses were also synonyms for flophouses.
Fantastic. Brought it full circle. Wow. Kyle, first of all, what a good game. All of those were fascinating.
I know.
And what a good word. I love that you have unlocked a culture that I have never thought about or put attention to. And I love that I now have.
Yeah. And a lot of American folk heroes, I guess, and celebrities hoboed, either out of necessity or out of choice. And it's really intertwined in the American story. So there's a lot to be said about hoboing.
Sure. Wow. Hey, everybody. Remember, you can watch us on YouTube at Butter No Parsnips, and you can find Butter No Parsnips on other social media as well, on Facebook and Instagram at Butter No Parsnips Podcast, and on TikTok at Butter No Parsnips. And if you liked today's episode, consider giving us a 5-star rating or review wherever you heard us.
And if you really liked today's episode, consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/butternoparsnips. Donating $5 or more gets you exclusive access to Buttered Parsnips, our After Hours podcast.
Thanks so much to all of you. You help us make what we make.
And with that, I've been Kyle Imperator.
And I've been Emily Moyers, and this has been Butter No Parsnips.
Butter No Parsnips is produced by Seth Glicksman, Emily Moyers, and myself, Kyle Imperator. The main and accompanying themes were composed by Kyle Imperator.